All right, so these mystery cell towers have everyone buzzing, right? Who wouldn't be intrigued? We're going deep on some claims from Alex Jones on these towers, and, well, his take is pretty wild.
Yeah, it really raises some questions, especially about, uh, security and privacy in our digital world.
For sure. So to start, let's get a clear picture of what we're dealing with. We have this CBS News report on these mystery towers, and even the FBI saying, nope, not us.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, their former agent, Ross Rice, he thinks it could be hackers trying to steal data.
Hmm. If the FBI is backing off like that and suggesting illegal activity, that's a big deal. It makes it even more mysterious.
Totally. And then Alex Jones jumps in, you know how he does, and says, hold on, I know what's really going on.
Yep.
He says he has this insider in Seattle who leaked him some secret diagrams.
Secret diagrams, what do those show?
Okay, so get this. He says, these diagrams show new cell towers disguised as everyday objects.
Like Transformers.
Transformers.
Like the robot.
Yeah. He says they're loaded with cameras, microphones, basically a whole cell system meant to capture everything.
Hidden in plain sight. It's a classic surveillance tactic. But the question is who's behind it?
Right, and that's where Jones's claims get really interesting. He's got this clip where he says similar systems have been around since 1998 in cities like Austin, Chicago, even New York and Boston. He mentions billions of dollars going into these projects, especially in Boston.
Wow. If that's true, we're talking about a massive long-term surveillance operation. But you have to consider the source right. Alex Jones has a reputation for being a little out there.
Yeah, he does. But let's just say for a second that he's right. What would that mean for us?
Well, it raises big questions about the government. Are they being transparent with us? If this surveillance tech is so widespread and hidden, is this government overreach? It's a concern a lot of people have.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And that's where Jones clashes with what the FBI is saying. He says the government is behind most of these towers. Not hackers, not criminals, the government.
That's a serious accusation. But even if some government agencies are involved, it doesn't mean the whole government is. We can't generalize like that.
I hear you, but it does make you wonder, what's the real story? Who do we trust? Even if these claims are partly true, it's unsettling.
Absolutely. It highlights that constant push and pull between privacy and security in our digital age. We all want to be safe from crime and terrorism, but do we want to live in a world where we're constantly being watched? It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. And Jones really hits on this point about how exposed our data is, especially when it's in the cloud or just moving through our phones.
He's right about that. The more we live our lives online, the more vulnerable our information becomes. Who's collecting it? What are they doing with it?
So where does that leave us? Are we just pawns in some giant surveillance game? It feels like Big Brother is watching and they're not even trying to hide it anymore.
Well, Jones paints a picture of a world where the people in power are making surveillance easy. And they don't care if we know about it, but is it really that simple?
He also talks about how all this data goes to the cloud,
Yeah.
and the encryption they use to protect it is actually public knowledge. It's like they're building a system where they hold all the keys.
That's true. Cloud computing does raise concerns about data security. When your info is on servers you don't control, it's definitely more vulnerable.
And then there's this whole debate about encryption backdoors. Law enforcement says they need access to encrypted data for national security, but where do you draw the line?
It's a tricky balance, trying to protect people while protecting their rights. We need to find a way to address real threats without sacrificing our freedom.
Okay, but if Jones is right and this network is as big as he says, what can we even do about it? It feels overwhelming, like we're fighting a losing battle.
I understand that feeling. There's no easy answer, but there are things we can do to at least try to protect ourselves.
Okay, give us some hope here. What can we do?
Well, for one, be more aware of what you're sharing online. Think before you post something sensitive or use apps that want access to everything on your phone.
Yeah, we've all been guilty of just clicking agree without reading those terms and conditions.
Right. It's important to be informed about what you're sharing and who has access to it.
What about using things like VPNs and encryption tools? Would those help?
They definitely add a layer of protection. A VPN can hide your IP address and encrypt your internet traffic, making it harder to track your online activity.
Okay, so be careful what you share, use VPNs, what else? There has to be more we can do.
Absolutely. We can support organizations that are fighting for our privacy rights and pushing for better data protection laws.
That's true. We can't just sit back and let this happen. We have to speak up and demand change.
You're right. It's a fight worth having. Our privacy is fundamental to our freedom. We can't just give it up without a fight.
You're right, we can't.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the possible players, the risks to our privacy, and some ways to protect ourselves. But one thing I'm still not clear on is this. If these cell towers are supposed to be hidden, How do they even get discovered in the first place?
That's a great question, and it takes us back to that CBS News report. Remember they were talking about rogue cell towers? Those might not be the same ones Alex Jones is describing.
Wait, so there could be two different kinds of hidden cell towers.
It's possible. The ones CBS News talked about were probably found because they were messing with legitimate cell phone service. Imagine a pirate radio station cutting in on a licensed broadcast.
So they were sloppy and got caught.
Basically, they weren't following the normal rules, which raised a red flag.
That makes sense. But what about the ones Jones is talking about? The ones disguised as everyday things? How would you even know those are there?
That's much harder to answer. If they're well disguised and working under the radar, they can be very hard to find.
So they could be all around us and we'd have no idea. That's kind of creepy.
It is unsettling. It shows how difficult it is to fight against secret surveillance.
This is all starting to feel overwhelming. Are we totally powerless against this?
Not necessarily. Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about how these technologies work and the tactics they're using, the better we can protect ourselves.
You're right. We can't just pretend this isn't happening.
Exactly. We need to be aware, informed, and proactive.
So what's the bottom line? What should our listeners take away from all of this?
I want them to know that the battle for privacy is real. It's happening right now. We can't afford to be complacent. We need to learn about it, take steps to protect our data, and demand accountability from the people in power.
That's powerful stuff. But Jones also called these towers illegal. Is he right about that? Is all of this surveillance actually against the law?
That's where it gets tricky. The legality of surveillance depends on who's doing it, why they're doing it, what methods they're using, and what the laws are.
Okay, break that down for us. What are the laws that govern surveillance?
Well, in the U.S., there's a whole mix of laws and regulations. At the federal level, you have the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures.
You mean like our right to privacy?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But how that applies to cell phone surveillance is something courts are still figuring out. Generally, law enforcement needs a warrant to see your cell phone data, like calls or texts. But there are exceptions, like emergencies, or if they think the information is about national security.
So it's not as simple as all surveillance is illegal?
No, it's complicated with a lot of gray areas. And then you have laws like the Patriot Act, passed after 9/11, which gave the government more surveillance power.
Right, the Patriot Act. That was a controversial one.
It was, and still is. It let the government do more surveillance without a warrant, and a lot of people felt it went too far and took away some of our freedoms.
So we have the Constitution, the Patriot Act. Do state laws matter at all?
Absolutely. States have their own laws about surveillance, and some are stricter than others. For example, some states require a warrant before law enforcement can use stingrays.
Stingrays, what are those?
They're like fake cell towers. They trick your phone into connecting and giving away its location. They've been used by law enforcement, but they raise big privacy concerns.
So we have all these different laws and regulations. It sounds hard to even know what's legal and what's not when it comes to surveillance.
It can be tough to keep up. That's why it's so important to have organizations that watch what's happening with surveillance and challenge the government or companies if they go too far.
Groups like the ACLU and the Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Exactly. They're doing important work to defend our privacy rights.
Okay, so to sum it up, Alex Jones saying hidden cell towers are illegal. Well, it's not that simple.
It really isn't. The legality depends on a lot of things, and there's no easy answer. But one thing's for sure, it's something we need to be paying attention to. Surveillance tech is always changing, and the laws are trying to catch up.
And what it means for our privacy is huge. This is a conversation we need to keep having. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What can they do to protect their privacy in a world where surveillance is everywhere?
We've touched on a few things already. Being aware of the risks is the first step. Then it's about taking practical steps to minimize your digital footprint. Think about what you share online, use strong passwords, and maybe think about using privacy tools like VPNs.
And stay informed, right? Keep up with the latest developments in surveillance tech and privacy law.
Exactly. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about how this technology works, the better we can protect ourselves.
Great advice. As we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, I keep thinking about something Alex Jones said that really stuck with me. He talked about how these hidden cell towers are a loss of freedom. Is he right? Are we really losing our freedom in the digital age?
That's a big question, and it's one that deserves a deeper look. I think it's safe to say that our freedom is changing in the digital age. We have more access to information and connection than ever before, but that comes with new risks and challenges.
So what's the balance? How do we enjoy the benefits of technology without giving up our freedom and privacy?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Hmm.
And there's no easy answer. But maybe, just maybe, by understanding the threats and taking action to protect ourselves, we can find a way to navigate this digital world without losing ourselves in the process.
That's a thought-provoking way to end this part of our deep dive. We'll continue this conversation next time and explore more about how surveillance might impact our freedom. Stay tuned.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure. This whole intersection of technology, freedom, and privacy.
It really is. And, as we keep digging into this world of hidden cell towers and surveillance, you can't help but feel a little uneasy about it all.
I get that. It's like there's this invisible net closing in around us, and we don't even know who's controlling it.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, how much do we really know about what's happening?
That's the question, isn't it? We're flooded with information, but how much of it can we actually trust? How do you separate fact from fiction when it comes to something as secretive as surveillance?
That reminds me of something Alex Jones was talking about. He brought up this idea of globalists who want surveillance to be so widespread that by the time we, the regular people, realize what's going on, it's too late.
Right, that classic conspiracy theory idea. It's a popular one because it plays on our fears of being controlled by forces we can't see.
I can see why people would believe it. It's like we're living in a spy movie with really high stakes.
Exactly. It taps into that basic fear of being watched, of someone having control over us. But we have to think critically about these claims. What evidence do we have?
Well, he talks about how all the data we create is being sent to the cloud and that the encryption they use to protect it is actually public knowledge. He suggests they're making a system where they can access everything.
Let's break that down a bit. Cloud computing has definitely raised concerns about data security. When your information is stored on servers you don't own, it's more vulnerable to hacks and unauthorized access. That's a valid concern.
And then there's the issue of encryption backdoors. We've seen this debate before with law enforcement saying they need access to encrypted data for national security.
That's a tough one. Strong arguments on both sides. We want law enforcement to be able to keep us safe, but creating backdoors to encryption could weaken the security of our digital lives and make us more vulnerable to cyber attacks.
So it's about finding a balance. How do we balance security and privacy?
That's the million-dollar question, and there's no easy answer. But I think open and honest conversations are important. We need to talk about the trade-offs and find solutions that protect us without sacrificing our basic freedoms.
That sounds really difficult. How do we even start these conversations when so much of what's happening with surveillance is hidden?
It's a challenge,
Yeah.
for sure. I think it starts with raising awareness. The more people understand about these issues, the more likely we are to demand change.
So what can we do to raise awareness, besides listening to this deep dive, of course?
Talking about these issues with your friends and family is a great place to start. Share articles and documentaries, participate in online discussions. We can also support organizations that are fighting for digital rights and privacy.
Like the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
They're doing amazing work to hold the government accountable and protect our digital freedoms.
I'm realizing that this whole surveillance thing is bigger than just hidden cell towers. It's about the future of our freedom and privacy in this increasingly digital world.
You're exactly right. This is about the kind of society we want to live in. Do we want a society where everything we do is tracked and analyzed, where our thoughts and actions are constantly monitored? Or do we want a society where we're free to explore, to disagree, to be ourselves without worrying about being watched?
That's a really powerful question, and it's one we all need to be asking ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
We need to be having these conversations now before it's too late. The choices we make today will determine the future of our digital lives and the future of our freedom.
So where do we go from here? What are some concrete steps we can take to protect ourselves and fight for a more private and free future?
Well, as we've discussed, being aware of the risks is the first step. Then it's about taking steps to reduce your digital footprint. Be careful about what you share online. Use strong passwords, and consider using privacy tools like VPNs and encrypted messaging apps.
Those are great tips, but it can feel overwhelming, like it's a losing battle. What can we do to feel more in control in this digital world?
But remember that knowledge is power. The more we understand about how these technologies work and what strategies they're using, the better we can protect ourselves. We can also find strength in community, connect with people and organizations that are fighting for digital rights and privacy.
That's a good point. We're stronger together.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting everyone. By fighting for privacy and freedom, we're building a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
That's inspiring. Listening to you talk about this, it reminds me of something Alex Jones said. He said, these hidden cell towers are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to surveillance. Is there any way to be truly anonymous in the digital age?
That's a great question, and one that deserves its own deep dive.
Hmm.
It's definitely a challenge, but maybe not impossible. There are things we can do to minimize our digital footprint and make it harder for others to track our every move.
So there's still hope for those of us who value our privacy.
Absolutely. We can't afford to give up. The fight for privacy and freedom is a constant battle, and it needs our attention and effort.
Well said. So what's the bottom line here? What should our listeners take away from this part of our deep dive?
I want them to understand that the fight for privacy is happening right now. It's not something in the future. We can't just sit back and watch. We need to educate ourselves, protect our data, and hold those in power accountable. Most importantly, we need to remember that we have the power to shape our digital world.
Those are powerful words, and I think they'll really resonate with our listeners. We've covered a lot in this deep dive, from the tech side of surveillance to the ethics and philosophy behind it. But there's one thing I'm still curious about.
What's that?
If this surveillance tech is getting so advanced, are there any limits to what they can do? I mean, can they actually read our minds?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and it takes us into the world of neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Mind-reading technology is still mostly science fiction, but there were some fascinating developments happening with brain-computer interfaces.
Brain-computer interfaces, that sounds like something straight out of science fiction.
Hmm.
You're saying mind-reading tech could actually be real.
Well, it's not exactly mind-reading like you see in the movies, but scientists are getting better at developing tech that can understand brain signals and turn them into actions or commands.
Okay.
It's still early, but it's pretty amazing. Imagine controlling your computer or even a robotic arm just by thinking about it.
That's incredible. But
Yeah,
it's kind of scary, too. If they can understand our brain signals, could they get into our thoughts, our memories, our worst fears?
that's the ethical question, isn't it? As this tech keeps developing, we need to talk about the risks. What could go wrong? We need to set some rules and boundaries to make sure this tech is used for good and doesn't get abused.
I agree, that's super important. But it feels like we're always playing catch up. Tech moves so fast, it's hard to even keep up, let alone set rules.
You're right, it's a constant challenge. That's why we need people and organizations who are watching these developments and warning us about the risks. We need to be ahead of the game, not behind it.
So where do we go for info and guidance on this stuff? Most of us aren't experts in neuroscience and AI.
There are some great resources online and in libraries. Groups like the Future of Privacy Forum and the Center for Democracy and Technology are doing good work in this area. And of course, you can always trust the deep dive to keep you updated on the latest developments.
That's right. We're always here to help you make sense of the digital world. But as we explore all these possibilities, it's easy to get lost in the what-ifs and start to worry. How can we stay grounded and in control when faced with all this?
That's a good question. I think it's important to remember that we still have choices. We can choose what tech we use, what info we share, and what companies we support. We can learn about the risks and do things to minimize them. And most importantly, we can speak up and demand change. We can hold the people in power accountable.
That's a good point. We're not helpless in all of this.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting everyone. By standing up for privacy and freedom, we're making a better world for everyone now and in the future.
That's inspiring. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to thank you for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a real eye-opener learning about surveillance privacy and what it all means for our freedom.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the deep dive. I always enjoy these conversations.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has been helpful and given you some things to think about. Remember, the future is not set in stone. We have the power to shape it. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay involved.